3 pilots have already said no, Ms. Voss. Laurel Voss tightened one hand around the armrest of her wheelchair and stared through the executive terminal windows at freezing rain streaking across the ramp outside Boise. Then call a fourth. Her travel coordinator lowered his phone. I did. 20 feet away, 9-year-old Owen Mercer stopped drawing airplanes in his little notebook and glanced at his father. Grant Mercer had just finished a simulator evaluation in the adjoining training center and wanted only one thing: get Owen home before the roads iced over. 3 years of raising his son alone had turned weather alerts, backup plans, and unnecessary risks into things Grant took very seriously. Before we go further, tell me, how old are you? Where are you watching from? And have you ever had to choose between what you wanted and what you knew was responsible? Laurel was 36, polished even after hours of delays, dressed in a cream blouse beneath a tailored navy jacket, with a charcoal winter coat folded behind her chair. She wasn't angry because she needed rescuing. She was angry because an important meeting in Portland began that evening, and 3 professional pilots had refused the trip after reviewing worsening freezing precipitation, shrinking alternate options, and a forecast changing faster than anyone liked. They're treating uncertainty like a reason to quit, Laurel said. Grant should have kept walking. Instead, he stopped. No, he said. They're treating uncertainty like something they have to answer for. Laurel turned toward him. Grant wore a dark quarter-zip beneath a weatherproof field jacket, the badge from the training center still clipped near his belt. Nothing about him suggested he belonged in her problem. And you are? Someone trying to get his kid home before the highway freezes. Owen gave his father a look that clearly said, then why are we still standing here? Laurel's coordinator received another call. The charter captain won't reconsider. He says the route isn't outside legal limits yet, but the margins aren't good enough with the pressure to arrive on schedule. Laurel's expression hardened. I never asked anyone to break a regulation. You don't have to, Grant said. Sometimes a deadline does the pushing for you. That landed badly. I don't need another person telling me what I can't do. Grant looked at her wheelchair only long enough to move slightly aside, so he wasn't blocking her path. Then he met her eyes. They're not telling you what you can't do. They're telling you what they won't pretend is safe. The room went quiet. Owen closed his notebook. Grant immediately regretted getting involved. His responsibility was standing beside him in a red winter jacket, waiting to go home. Grant had built their life around reducing risks he didn't need to take, and another person's urgent flight was certainly one of them. Then a dispatcher hurried through the doorway carrying an updated weather packet. He spotted Grant and stopped. Mercer. Good. I need another set of eyes on this. Laurel looked from the dispatcher to Grant. Her irritation shifted into curiosity. Grant didn't reach for the packet. Not yet. He looked at Owen first, because saying yes to even examining the problem meant stepping toward a part of himself he'd spent years carefully keeping at a distance. Grant looked at Owen again before taking the weather packet. 5 minutes, he said. Owen nodded. I know what 5 minutes means when airplanes are involved. Grant almost smiled. Stay where I can see you. He moved to a table near the windows and opened the packet. Laurel rolled closer, watching him scan radar trends, freezing level forecasts, winds, alternates, and the latest pilot reports without rushing. The dispatcher stood beside him. Portland's still open. Open isn't the same as comfortable, Grant said. Freezing precipitation is building along the direct route, and the useful alternates get worse if this moves 20 miles east. Laurel folded her arms. So the other pilots were right? They made decisions based on their own margins. I'm not grading them. That answer surprised her. She had expected him to prove he was braver than the men who had refused. Instead, he seemed almost protective of their decisions. Would you fly it? She asked. Grant kept reading. Not the flight you're asking. 4. That's not what I asked. It's the answer. Laurel's jaw tightened. Grant turned the packet so she could see the route. If somebody insists on Boise to Portland nonstop, with arrival time treated like a promise, no, I wouldn't take it either. I have a board meeting. Weather doesn't know that. This isn't some dinner reservation. That meeting decides whether an accessibility project we've spent 4 years developing stays alive. Grant paused. For the first time, he heard what was underneath her impatience. Still, he tapped bend on the chart. Then give yourself a better chance of arriving instead of pretending there's only one acceptable plan. He outlined a different route with larger margins, more fuel flexibility, and been available as an early diversion point if conditions deteriorated. It wasn't elegant. It could cost Laurel the meeting, but it gave the flight options. The dispatcher studied the proposal. That's workable if the next update improves. Laurel looked at Grant's training center badge. You're an instructor? Simulator evaluator. Aviation safety instructor. And you still fly? Grant's eyes flicked toward Owen. Enough to stay current. The answer carried a boundary she noticed, but didn't understand. Her coordinator stepped closer with a tablet. His credentials check out. Commercial certificate, instrument privileges, current medical, recurrent training. He's qualified on the aircraft type. Grant gave him a flat look. You ran me while I was standing here? Ms. Voss likes information. I like knowing who's telling me no, Laurel said. Grant handed the packet back. Now you know. Owen approached with his notebook tucked under one arm. Dad, the road app says freezing rain starts here in 40 minutes. Grant checked his watch. His original plan had been simple. Drive home, heat leftover chili, help Owen finish his science project, and stay off icy roads. Safe. Predictable. Exactly the kind of evening Grant had built their life around. Laurel watched him. You could fly this route. Qualified and willing aren't the same thing. What would make you willing? Grant looked toward the aircraft outside, then at his son. He could feel the old reflex already forming. Walk away, eliminate the uncertainty, call that responsibility. Right now, he said. Nothing. Laurel's expression cooled. Then why spend 10 minutes redesigning my flight? Grant picked up Owen's backpack. Because whether I fly it and whether it can be flown responsibly are two different questions. He started toward the training center corridor. Behind him, Laurel called, Mr. Mercer. Grant stopped. If the weather improves, I want to know what your conditions are. He didn't turn around immediately. Owen looked up at him, curious. Grant finally glanced back at Laurel. My conditions won't be about money. Good, she said. Neither is the reason I need to get there. For the first time since they'd met, neither of them sounded angry. The problem between them had changed. Laurel no longer needed to discover whether Grant could fly. She needed to discover what it would take for him to say yes. 25 minutes later, the weather update arrived. The freezing band had shifted enough to improve Grant's proposed route, though nobody in the operations room called it perfect. Grant studied the new information twice before Laurel spoke. Your conditions. He set the tablet down. 3. Laurel waited. First, my weather minimums are mine. If conditions cross the limits I set before departure, we divert. No debate in the air. Fine. Second, cockpit decisions stay in the cockpit. Your coordinator, your board, your investors, none of them get a vote because somebody's calendar is falling apart. Laurel's eyes narrowed slightly. And the third, if I decide we're done, we're done. You don't use your title to push for another approach, another airport, or another 15 minutes. Laurel leaned back. You're asking me to give you control. Only over the airplane, Grant said. Your life is still yours. Something in her expression changed. People often made decisions around Laurel before asking what she wanted, where she could sit, what assistance she needed, what was supposedly too difficult for her. Grant had done something different. He had drawn a hard boundary around his responsibility without claiming authority over hers. All right, she said. All 3. Grant looked surprised by how quickly she answered. I haven't said yes yet. I noticed. Owen had been sitting nearby with his notebook open. He now walked over and placed it against his chest. Dad, yeah. Can I ask something without you getting mad? Grant sighed. That's usually how people start right before making me mad. Owen ignored that. You tell your students being careful isn't the same as being scared, right? Grant went still. Laurel looked away, sensing that the conversation had suddenly become private, but Owen continued. And you tell them fear can make a decision before they even look at the facts. Owen, I'm just asking. Grant crouched beside him. You're 9. I was 9 this morning too. Despite himself, Grant almost laughed. Then Owen's face softened. Mom wouldn't want you doing dangerous stuff. I know that. But she wouldn't want you scared of everything either. The words hit harder than Grant expected. His wife had been gone 3 years. She hadn't died in an airplane or because Grant had made some terrible mistake. She had gotten sick, and nothing Grant did could change the ending. Afterward, he had quietly reorganized his life around one promise. Owen would never lose him because Grant took a risk he could have avoided. It sounded responsible. Most days it was. But standing there, Grant wondered when responsibility had started becoming a place to hide. His sister lived 15 minutes from the airport and had already offered to keep Owen overnight if the roads worsened. Grant called her. Then he reviewed the aircraft status with operations, checked the weather again, confirmed the fuel plan, alternates, and crew requirements, and made sure every condition he had set could actually be honored. Only then did he return to Laurel. She had put on her charcoal winter coat and was speaking quietly with her assistant. Grant stopped in front of her. "We're not racing the weather. We're not racing your meeting. We follow the plan until the plan tells us to stop." Laurel nodded. "Understood. And if anything changes before departure, we stay here." "Understood." Grant studied her for another second. "Then I'll take the flight." Laurel didn't smile like she'd won. Instead, she held out her hand. "Then I'll trust your judgment." Grant shook it. "Don't trust me that much. Trust the rules we agreed on." Outside, the rain still tapped against the terminal windows. Nothing about the sky promised them an easy trip. But for the first time that afternoon, neither Grant nor Laurel was pretending uncertainty could be controlled. They were simply deciding what they would do when it arrived. By the time Grant reached the aircraft, the freezing rain had softened to a cold mist. Ramp lights reflected across the wet pavement as the ground crew prepared Laurel's mid-sized business jet. Grant walked around the aircraft slowly, checking surfaces, tires, panels, and anything the weather could complicate. He wasn't trying to look confident. He was trying to find a reason not to go before that reason found them in the air. Inside the cabin, Laurel transferred into a secured passenger seat with assistance from a trained attendant while her wheelchair was properly stowed. Grant waited until the process was complete before stepping aboard. "Comfortable?" he asked. "Yes." "Need anything before we close up?" Laurel studied him for a moment. "No assumptions?" "About what?" "Most people see the chair and start deciding what I need before asking." Grant shrugged. "You've been managing your life longer than I've known you." Laurel gave a small smile. "Fair point." Grant turned toward the cockpit. Her coordinator intercepted him. "Portland says the board can delay 45 minutes, maybe an hour." "Don't tell me how much time we can make up," Grant said. "Tell me when they stop waiting." "That's useful information." The coordinator nodded. Minutes later, Grant completed the pre-flight checks with the assigned second pilot, Captain Nora Bennett, a charter company pilot who had agreed to operate the flight under Grant's proposed conditions. Grant took the left seat. Nora took the right. Nothing about the arrangement was improvised. Both were qualified, current, and working from the same plan. As the engine started, Grant felt something he hadn't expected. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The instruments illuminated in front of him, familiar enough to feel almost personal. He had spent years teaching other pilots how to respond when plans failed, yet he had quietly built his own life around preventing plans from changing at all. "You good?" Nora asked. Grant checked the panel once more. "I'm good." They taxied carefully toward the runway. In the cabin, Laurel watched Boise's lights slide past the window. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Portland. She read the first two, then turned the screen face down. When the aircraft stopped short of the runway, Grant received another weather update. Nora studied it. "Still within what we briefed." Grant nodded, but didn't immediately request takeoff clearance. "You seeing something?" "Just making sure I want this because the numbers still work, not because we've already come this far." Nora smiled faintly. "That's why I'm sitting here instead of somebody who thinks takeoff means commitment." Grant keyed the radio. A few minutes later, the jet accelerated down the wet runway and lifted into the dark Idaho sky. Laurel felt the climb more than she heard it. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them when the aircraft entered cloud. The ride became uneven but manageable. 20 minutes later, her coordinator brought a message forward through the cabin communication system. Portland's board could hold the meeting, but not indefinitely. Grant read the message and passed it to Nora without comment. "Pressure starts early," she said. "It always does." Ahead, the weather display showed the route they had planned, and a growing area of precipitation beginning to reshape itself near their path. Grant adjusted his headset. They were airborne now, but his promise hadn't changed. Getting Laurel to Portland was the goal. Knowing when to stop trying was the responsibility. 40 minutes into the flight, the weather stopped behaving like the forecast Grant had studied in Boise. It didn't become dramatic. There was no violent drop, no screaming alarm, no cinematic wall of lightning. What changed was more dangerous in a quieter way. The margins began disappearing. Nora enlarged the latest weather display. That band moved east faster than expected. Grant studied it. Yeah, the direct path toward Portland was still technically available, but the comfortable space around it was narrowing. Bend remained behind and southeast of them, reachable with plenty of fuel. Continuing west would mean committing more deeply to a situation with fewer good exits. Grant requested updated conditions. While they waited, Laurel's assistant came forward with another message. The board will hold for another 30 minutes. After that, 2 directors have to leave. Grant didn't look away from the instruments. Thanks. She asked if we're still on schedule. Tell her we're still flying the plan. The assistant returned to the cabin. A minute later, Laurel's voice came through the interphone. Grant, that's not an answer. He picked up the handset. It's the only one I have right now. Portland is still accepting arrivals. I know. And we're still legal to continue. Grant paused. Yes. Then what's the problem? Legal is the floor, Laurel. It's not the goal. Silence followed. Grant could almost picture her expression. Nora handed him the updated report. The freezing layer had thickened along the route, and one of the alternates Grant had liked earlier was becoming less useful. Nothing demanded an emergency response. Everything suggested making the decision before it became one. Grant keyed the interphone again. We're diverting to Bend. This time Laurel answered immediately. How long? Long enough that you're probably not making Portland for that meeting. Another silence. Then her coordinator's voice appeared faintly in the background. Laurel, Portland is reporting arrivals. If we continue, Grant cut in. I need to hear from Ms. Voss. A few seconds passed. I'm here, Laurel said. Her voice was controlled now, but Grant could hear the frustration underneath it. Explain it to me. He did. No jargon meant to intimidate her. No suggestion that she couldn't understand. He told her what had changed, which options were getting worse, what fuel they had, and why Bend was the decision he would make without a deadline sitting behind him. Could you keep going, she asked. Yes. Could you land in Portland? Maybe. That's not the question I want deciding this. Laurel looked through the cabin window into darkness. For years of work waited at the other end of this flight. Her company had developed a mobility system she believed could give thousands of people more independence, and tonight's board vote determined whether the expensive final phase survived. She had spent most of her adult life fighting people who confused caution with knowing what was best for her. Doctors had done it. Investors had done it. Strangers still did it. Every instinct in her wanted to say, keep going. Her coordinator leaned closer. If you miss this meeting, they may table the project until next quarter. Laurel stared at her phone. Messages filled the screen. Where are you? Can you make it? We need a decision. She could call the charter company. She could demand another opinion. She could remind everyone whose aircraft contract, company, and deadline were involved. Instead, she remembered Grant standing in the terminal. Only over the airplane. Your life is still yours. That was the bargain. Trust meant nothing if she honored it only while his judgment matched what she wanted. Laurel opened the board call. This is Laurel Voss. A director answered. Laurel, we're waiting. How far out are you? She took one slow breath. I'm not coming. Her coordinator turned toward her. On the flight deck, Grant heard the words through the open communication line. Laurel continued. Our pilot is diverting because the margins are deteriorating. I'm not asking him to trade safety for my calendar. Can we delay another hour? Someone asked. Laurel looked at the black window beside her. No. Take the deadline out of the cockpit. Continue without me, or move the vote. That's your decision. She ended the call before anyone could bargain. Grant changed course for Bend. Nora entered the new heading, then glanced at him. She let it go. Grant watched the navigation display settle onto their new route. No, he said quietly. She chose to let it go. In the cabin, Laurel placed her phone face down on the table. She had spent years proving that being paralyzed didn't mean surrendering control of her life. Tonight, she discovered something harder. Sometimes choosing for yourself meant deliberately giving up the outcome you wanted. The landing in Bend was uneventful, which was exactly how Grant wanted it. No applause. No shaken passengers. No dramatic story for anyone to tell later. The jet simply broke through the clouds, touched down on the wet runway, and taxied toward the terminal beneath a steady winter rain. Once the engines shut down, Grant remained in the cockpit long enough to finish the checklist with Nora. You made the call early, she said. That's why it felt boring. Boring is underrated. Grant finally stepped into the cabin. Laurel was reading an email on her phone. Her coordinator stood nearby, looking as though he expected an argument. Grant stopped beside her. I'm sorry about Portland. Laurel locked her screen. Are you sorry we diverted? No. Then don't apologize for the consequence of a decision you still believe was right. Grant wasn't expecting that. Your project could be delayed. It could. 4 years of work. Still 4 years of work tomorrow. The terminal staff brought Laurel's wheelchair aboard and assisted with her transfer. Grant stayed out of the way until she was ready, then walked beside her through the quiet terminal. Most shops were closed. Rain tapped against the tall windows, and a television above an empty coffee counter showed weather warnings across Oregon. Laurel's coordinator went to arrange rooms. Grant checked his phone. 7 messages from his sister. The last included a photo of Owen asleep on her couch with his airplane notebook open across his chest. Grant smiled before he could stop himself. Laurel noticed. Your son. He showed her the picture. He fought bedtime for exactly 6 minutes. Looks like bedtime won. Bedtime usually does. Laurel studied Grant's face. The man she'd met in Boise had treated every unnecessary risk like a threat. Yet in the cockpit, he hadn't looked afraid of uncertainty. He had worked with it. Why did you stop flying regularly? She asked. Grant put his phone away. I still fly. You know what I mean. He looked through the terminal windows. My wife, Hannah, got sick 3 years ago. Fast. By the time we understood how serious it was, most of our plans had stopped meaning anything. Laurel said nothing. After she died, Owen was 6. I started turning down trips. Then longer flights. Then anything I couldn't justify as necessary. Teaching gave me aviation without being gone much. Because you wanted to protect him. That's what I told myself. You don't believe that anymore? Grant took a moment. I believe protecting him became mixed up with protecting myself from ever being the reason something happened. Laurel understood that more than she expected. After my accident, everyone suddenly had an opinion about risk, she said. What chair I should use. Where I should travel. Whether I should live alone. People called it concern, but sometimes concern was just control wearing better clothes. Grant glanced at her. So you learned to push back. Against everything. Even when somebody had a point. Laurel smiled without humor. Especially then. Grant leaned against the window frame. That's inconvenient. You're one to talk. He laughed quietly. For the first time, there was no contest between them. No pilot and CEO. No deadline. Just 2 people recognizing different versions of the same mistake. Grant had tried to protect love by controlling uncertainty. Laurel had tried to protect independence by refusing to surrender control. His phone buzzed again. Owen was awake. Grant answered the video call. Hey, buddy. Owen's sleepy face filled the screen. Did you make Portland? No. We stopped in Bend. Owen rubbed one eye. Because the weather got worse? Because our options were getting worse. Owen nodded as if that distinction made perfect sense. So you did what you teach. Grant looked toward Laurel. She had turned toward the rain, giving him privacy. Yeah, he said. I guess I did. After the call ended, Grant stood quietly for a moment. He had spent 3 years believing being a good father meant removing uncertainty wherever possible. Tonight had reminded him of something he taught pilots every week. Safety wasn't the absence of uncertainty. It was knowing how to respond when uncertainty showed up. And for the first time in years, Grant wondered whether Owen needed a father who avoided every risk, or one who could show him how to face the right ones. By early evening, the rain over Bend had weakened, and the latest weather picture west of them looked better than it had an hour earlier. Not perfect. Better. Grant sat at a small table near the terminal windows with Nora, reviewing updated forecasts, winds, fuel requirements, and alternate airports. Laurel rolled over after ending another call. The board postponed the vote until tomorrow afternoon, she said. Grant looked up. That's good. It's not a victory. They postponed it because they couldn't agree without me. Still gives you time. Laurel shook her head. I'm not telling you that because I want you to fly. That caught his attention. I'm telling you so the deadline isn't part of your decision anymore. She nodded toward the weather information. Your call. An hour earlier, Grant would have expected those words to make the choice easier. Instead, they exposed something uncomfortable. The route was improving. Their fuel plan was solid. Multiple alternates were available again. Nora saw nothing that automatically ruled out continuing toward an airport near Portland. Yet Grant kept searching for another reason to stop. We could stay here overnight, he said. Nora leaned back. We could. No reason to force it. Nobody's forcing anything. Grant zoomed in on another forecast. Laurel watched him quietly. What? He finally asked. Nothing. You have that look. I was deciding whether it's my place to say something. Since when has that stopped you? A faint smile crossed her face. Then she became serious. If one of your students showed you exactly what you're looking at right now, would you tell him the flight shouldn't go? Grant didn't answer. Laurel continued carefully. I'm not asking you to take me anywhere. If you say we stay, I stay. But are you looking at the weather, or are you looking for permission to avoid the decision? Grant's expression tightened. That's a dangerous question to ask a pilot. Then don't answer it for me. Answer it for yourself. Nora remained silent. Grant returned to the reports. The frustrating part was that Laurel wasn't challenging his authority. She was respecting it. That meant he couldn't hide behind resisting her pressure anymore. He had to examine his own. His phone buzzed. Owen had sent a picture of two stick figures beside an airplane. Underneath, in uneven handwriting, he'd written, Dad plus me. Come home safe. Not come home now. Grant stared at those 4 words. For 3 years, he had treated safety as if it meant reducing life until nothing unpredictable remained. He had called that fatherhood because fatherhood sounded nobler than fear. But the numbers in front of him weren't asking for recklessness. They were asking for judgment. Grant looked at Nora. Run the route with me again. They went through everything from the beginning. No shortcuts. No assumptions based on the previous plan. When they finished, Nora tapped the screen. Within the limits we briefed. Grant nodded. And if the coastal winds keep increasing? We use the alternate. Same as before. Laurel waited across the room. Grant approached her. Conditions support continuing, but we're not going directly into Portland. We'll use the airport we briefed nearby, and if the approach doesn't meet our standards, we divert. No second guessing. Understood. You sure you don't want to argue? Laurel raised an eyebrow. I'm trying something new. Grant almost laughed. Apparently we both are. Outside, ground crews moved beneath white ramp lights as the jet was prepared again. Grant zipped his weatherproof jacket and headed toward the door. This time, he wasn't taking off because someone powerful needed him to. And he wasn't staying on the ground simply because uncertainty existed. He was making the decision he would expect a good pilot to make, one careful choice at a time. The second departure felt different. No deadline followed them down the runway. No board members were waiting on a clock. Laurel had made her choice, and Grant had made his. Now the only question was whether each of them could live by what they had learned when the decision became uncomfortable again. The jet climbed west from Bend. With Nora beside Grant, both pilots working through the same procedures they had briefed on the ground. The weather was noticeably better than before, but the air remained unsettled. Laurel sat secured in the cabin, her wheelchair properly stowed, while her assistant monitored the postponed board meeting arrangements. For most of the flight, nothing remarkable happened. Grant preferred it that way. Then Nora received the latest airport observation near Portland. Crosswinds increasing. Grant read the numbers. Still within limits. Forecast. Could get stronger before we arrive. Grant requested the latest reports from aircraft ahead of them. One crew described moderate gusts near the runway. Another had landed without difficulty 10 minutes earlier. The situation wasn't unsafe by definition. It was simply changing. Laurel's assistant appeared on the interphone. Ms. Voss wants to know if anything's changed. Grant answered, winds are increasing. We're evaluating it. Do you need her? No. A moment later, Laurel's voice replaced her assistant's. For the record, I'm not asking whether we're continuing. Grant glanced at Nora. I know. Good. Because I'm getting very good at not running your cockpit. Don't get too proud. It's only been a few hours. Laurel laughed softly and disconnected. Grant looked back at the instruments. That small exchange mattered more than he wanted to admit. Earlier, he had needed Laurel's pressure to disappear before he could trust his own judgment. Now there was no pressure to fight. They began the approach. The runway environment appeared through broken cloud ahead, lights glowing against the wet darkness. Nora read the wind update. The numbers remained acceptable, but the gust spread had widened. Still within limits, she said. Grant nodded. Continue. The jet descended. Nothing was wrong. Yet as they moved lower, the wind shifted again. Grant felt the corrections increasing. The approach was still technically salvageable. That was exactly the kind of moment when ego could become as dangerous as fear. He had already diverted once. He had already delayed Laurel's trip. Part of him wanted to finish now, to prove that. Continuing from Bend had been the right decision. Another part wanted to abandon the approach simply because walking away felt safer. Neither voice deserved the controls. "Wind check," Grant said. Nora read the latest report. Grant watched the runway, then the instruments, then the trend. The airplane was asking for more correction than he wanted this close to landing. He made the decision. "Go around." Nora responded immediately. Power came up, the aircraft climbed, and the runway lights dropped away beneath them. In the cabin, Laurel felt the acceleration and knew exactly what had happened. Her assistant looked toward her. "Are we trying again?" Laurel shook her head. "That's not my decision." Up front, Grant and Nora stabilized the aircraft and reviewed the situation. They had fuel. They had an alternate with better winds. Another attempt was possible, but Grant looked at the updated trend and saw no reason to chase an outcome simply because the runway had been visible. "We're going to the alternate," he said. Nora nodded. "Agreed." Grant informed Laurel himself. "We're diverting." The approach was within limits when we started, but the conditions weren't stable enough for me to keep forcing corrections near the runway. Laurel answered without hesitation. "Understood. You don't sound disappointed." "I am disappointed." Grant waited. "But disappointment doesn't make you wrong." 40 minutes later, the jet touched down smoothly at the alternate. When Grant entered the cabin after shutdown, Laurel was already preparing for her transfer. She looked up at him. "You know what's interesting?" "What's that?" "You said no tonight without hiding behind fear." Grant considered it. "And you heard no without treating it like defeat." Laurel smiled. "Apparently we're both trainable." Grant laughed. Outside, cold rain shimmered beneath the ramp lights. They hadn't reached the airport they intended. Grant hadn't performed some impossible landing. Laurel hadn't gotten her way. Yet both understood that the flight had succeeded for a reason neither would have recognized that morning. Grant had stopped confusing courage with continuing and caution with retreat. Laurel had stopped confusing control with authority over every outcome. The airplane had never needed a hero. It had needed people willing to make a responsible decision and accept what that decision cost. The next afternoon, Laurel joined the board meeting remotely from a quiet conference room near the alternate airport. There was no dramatic entrance and no speech about the flight. She presented the mobility project, answered difficult questions, challenged two directors who wanted to reduce its scope, and defended the work on its merits. When the vote finally came, the project was approved to continue. Not because Laurel had arrived like a hero, but because she had built something worth defending. Grant wasn't there to see it. He had already returned to Boise with Nora after the weather improved. Owen met him inside the terminal, running toward him with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Grant crouched and caught him. "You came home safe," Owen said. "That was the plan." "Did you save the CEO?" Grant smiled. "No." Owen looked disappointed. "Then what happened?" Grant stood and took his son's hand. "I flew an airplane. Made some decisions. Changed my mind when the conditions changed. That's it. That's usually what good flying looks like." A week later, Grant received a handwritten note from Laurel. No job offer. No check. No invitation to become her personal pilot. Just a few sentences. "Thank you for treating my judgment with respect even when you disagreed with what I wanted. You reminded me that independence isn't proving I never need anyone." Grant kept the note in his flight bag. His own life changed quietly after that. He didn't abandon teaching, and he didn't suddenly start chasing dangerous flights to prove he was fearless. He simply stopped letting fear make every decision before the facts had a chance. He accepted occasional flights that fit his schedule as a father. More importantly, he began taking Owen with him to the airport again, showing him that responsibility wasn't about hiding from uncertainty. It was about preparing for it. Laurel changed too. She remained demanding, stubborn, and fiercely independent. But she became more careful about recognizing the difference between someone trying to control her and someone honestly carrying a responsibility she couldn't carry for them. Months later, she and Grant met again when her company invited aviation accessibility specialists, pilots, and travelers with disabilities to discuss practical improvements for business aircraft cabins. Grant attended as an instructor. Laurel attended as herself, not as a woman needing rescue, and not as a CEO expecting obedience. During a break, she rolled beside him and nodded toward a display. "Still telling people no?" "When necessary." "Good." "Still arguing?" "When necessary." They laughed. From the outside, their story could easily be reduced to titles. a paralyzed CEO, and a single dad who took the controls when others wouldn't. But titles are often where people begin judging one another instead of where they stop. Wealth doesn't make a person more deserving of dignity. Poverty doesn't make someone less intelligent, less capable, or less worthy of being heard. A wheelchair doesn't erase authority over one's own life, just as an ordinary paycheck doesn't erase skill, courage, or character. Human worth cannot be measured by a bank account, job title, clothing, physical ability, or the seat someone occupies on an airplane. Rich or poor, powerful or overlooked, people deserve respect, compassion, and the chance to be known before they are judged. Grant never needed Laurel's money to become valuable. Laurel never needed Grant to rescue her to become strong. What they gave each other was something simpler and harder: respect without pity, trust without control, and the freedom to make responsible choices without being reduced to other people's assumptions. In the end, the most important thing Grant took control of that night wasn't an airplane. It was the fear that had quietly been controlling him. And Laurel discovered that trusting another person didn't diminish her independence. Sometimes it proved just how secure that independence had become.